Hello and welcome to the Bubbling Up Podcast, a show about the people and places of Hot Springs, South Dakota, and the Southern Black Hills. I'm your host, Justin Gosman, and this show is coordinated through the Hot Springs Area Chamber of Commerce. Bubble Up. The Cambridge Dictionary defines bubble up as to rise to the surface or to become obvious. And that's why this show came about. I want the stories behind our fascinating small South Dakota town to rise to the surface and be heard. Hot Springs, South Dakota, population 3,460 today, is a community in the southwestern corner of South Dakota, about 50 miles south of Mount Rushmore. Founded in 1890, we got our name from, you guessed it, naturally warm mineral springs that bubble up from underground. The stories seem endless, and it's my hope that this show will enlighten not only the fellow residents of and potential visitors to Hot Springs as to the intriguing history of our community, but also to its ongoing inner workings today, the stories behind our local businesses and nonprofit organizations and events, the voices that make a community what it is, and that are working to make it what it can be. I hope you'll join me on this journey. We are sitting down with Rita Fraune, one of the nominees for Citizen of the Year. First, I want to say congratulations on being nominated.
Thank you.
And thank you for sitting down with me today.
Thank you.
So one of the questions that we've been asking all of the nominees for Citizen of the Year as we've been interviewing them on the show is, how did you come to Hot Springs? Because you have a very interesting story of how you came to Hot Springs and what brought you here.
Well, I was a teacher back in Rock Island, Illinois, and I retired in 2003. And I had, before I retired, there was a newspaper that came out called Time for Kids, and it was like Weekly Reader when we were younger.
Yeah.
And the entire issue was about the Wild Horse Sanctuary. And they wanted volunteers out here, and I have always loved horses, and I've always wanted to work with wild horses. So the year before I retired, I drove out and saw what it was all about, and then fell in love with South Dakota, just absolutely fell in love. And when I came out here, I decided that I was going to build a house or find a house and move out here. And everyone keeps asking me, who did I know out here? I didn't know anybody.
Wow.
But now I know quite a few people.
So what you volunteered there for about 5 years. What
Right.
all did you do out at the horse sanctuary? Because this was what, 14 years ago? So that would
Yes.
have been
2004. Yeah,
2004,
2004. Yeah.
Okay.
I did everything. I fed the horses. I mended fences. I have learned an unbelievable amount of things out there. I watered the horses, which is a major job out there. You have to fill the tanks.
Yeah.
And I gave tours. I refused to drive the buses, so I gave the $150 tours. A person asked me one time, or I asked a person, I said, "Don't you think this is rather expensive?" And she said, "Honey, I'm from Green Bay, Wisconsin, and up there everybody spends tons of money watching those football games, and this is once in a chance lifetime to see something like this." So she
Is worth it.
it's worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but there isn't anything. I worked in the gift shop. I've done everything out here, and I
Wow.
love it. And I still work out there. I have a friend, Sandy, who comes from Iowa every year. She's been doing it a lot longer than I have, and she comes for 3 weeks in the spring and 3 weeks in the fall, and then I go out and I work with the horses out in the pasture.
That is so cool.
So I love it.
Where did your love of horses come from? Was that a lifelong thing?
Oh yeah, and my parents were not rich, and so we could never afford a horse. So I just loved them.
So then you got quickly involved with a lot of other organizations in the community.
Right. I I just knew people that knew jobs that had to be finished. My first one was with the food pantry, and I enjoyed working up at the museum, and so I started volunteering up there.
Yeah.
And then I got on a couple boards, and one of the board I got on was Friends of the Library, and we built the book barn primarily to store all the equipment that was needed for the fundraisers for Friends of the Library and for storage area for the library.
Right.
And so now we have moved all of those out of there and got another storage area for those two things.
Oh, wow.
And we have over 20,000 books in the library. Over the years, we have raised almost $40,000 for the library, just selling used books.
That is insane. That's awesome. I remember, and I was going to ask you about this, with developing the book barn. I remember we used to have, I think every summer, book sales down at the old library building downtown. How did the book barn come about, and like what was the transition process of how that came about?
I was only here for one of those.
Right.
And then what happened was we built this book barn, and Gary Shue and I went up one time and we looked at all this space, and I said, I need shelves in here, and let's start having our book sales up there. Because what was happening before was we were getting all these books donated. They were all in this old building up by the old water thing, and we started building, and every year they would take all these books out. They would never go through them. They would take them all downtown. They would sell the books, and then they'd pick it up and do it. And they did very good on there. One time they did $1,400 on a book sale.
Wow.
But the problem was all the books never changed.
Right.
When they put the books away, they didn't go through them afterwards. So when I first got on the board, my first primary thing was to go to this old building and go through all the books. And so I went through all the books and I threw all the books away. Well, it really was a big thing to get, and it was always on the hottest day of the year. You could just depend on it. And they would have to go to this old barn, load up all these books, take them downtown. They weren't sorted. They just were boxes on the ground.
I remember that.
Yeah. And you had to just go through every single box to find anything.
Yeah. It was totally random.
Right. And a lot of books never got looked at twice.
Right.
And there were a lot of books in there that, were like old encyclopedias and stuff that should have never moved out of that barn. So I threw everything away, and then they built this barn, and I said, gee, can I start having the book sales up here?
Yeah.
And little did they know that I was going to take over that whole barn. Someone suggested that we expand and build a second floor, and that is not going to happen. Can you imagine?
Oh, man.
Carrying all those books up and
Upstairs
down?
and downstairs, yeah. Whew.
Yeah.
So with the book barn, like you said, they used to do that, the book sale basically once a year. But now with the book barn, it allows, having that there allows the Friends of the Library and the library to do that multiple times a year throughout the summer.
Yes.
It's twice a month, isn't it?
It's twice a month, and we open as soon as that we can get in there and put all the books away. Last year when I opened up, we had 57 boxes of books to shelve before we could get in there. There's no heat in there, and so, or air conditioning, but we've got fans now. But there's no heat in there, so.
In the winter, it's pretty bitter, I imagine.
Yeah, there's no way we could work in there in this kind of weather.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the other tasks you've been involved with the Friends of the Library, the Fall Carnival, and
and really Mary
triathlon.
Laycock and Mike Laycock do the carnival every year.
And then the triathlon as well. You help with registration and sort of hands-on staffing.
Right, and again, that's basically Pat Russell takes care of that, and Barb Fedders, his wife.
And so with all of that, then on the other side, you've mentioned that you were on the board at the Pioneer Museum.
Oh, and that was
and worked as a
wonderful.
volunteer up there.
Yeah.
I was actually curious how, and this kind of ties in with the library, but your fascination with history.
I love history.
And literature. How
Yeah.
did that develop?
I've just always loved history. History was always my favorite class in school, and and then I got to be friends with Wanda, and then I started volunteering up there. And then Carol Sides took over, and she's the president right now, and she has taken it upon herself to inventory that museum. It's never been inventoried.
Wow.
And so I go up and I help her, whenever I can to inventory the building.
Yeah. And so with your knowledge of history, how has that impacted, I guess, operations up there? Has it helped to have, obviously you've all volunteered your time, not just on the back end of things, but also on the front end, assisting visitors.
Right.
But you have such a fascination with history, it seems almost encyclopedic. And I guess, what are the resources you use to learn about things that other people might not have looked at for years?
Well, I read. I read unbelievably. I also belong to the group called Westerners that is here, and they do fabulous jobs on history, and I try to attend their meetings.
Okay.
And then I also belong to a group called Seekers, and that is a bunch of ladies who have been around forever, and they discuss antiques.
Ah.
And so everybody brings an antique for every meeting.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
we meet once a month, and then we talk about it. And there are 4 ladies on there right now that are antique dealers, that were antique dealers at one time in their life. And I was an antique dealer besides teaching.
Yeah.
So I just try to learn as much as I can about it. I love that's one of the reasons I love South Dakota so much. In Iowa and never Illinois, there's a huge study of all the historical things that you do, and I love that about South Dakota.
That's fantastic. What would you say has been like one of the most exciting challenges that you've had to overcome in all of your volunteer efforts over the years? But that was exciting, not that it was bad, but
no,
that was cool to overcome.
Well, I love working with the History Conference.
Yeah,
You know, that's one of the big things that the Pioneer Museum does, and there's just so many things. It just never stops. Like the Pioneer Museum has that wonderful thing every summer where you go up to the cemetery.
The cemetery walk, yeah. I
It
love
is
that.
wonderful.
Yeah.
It's just, you learn so much from that. It's just, there's just no end to what the people around here can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the questions that I've been asking all of the nominees for Citizen of the Year is, who was a person that was influential in your life? Because Citizen of the Year award is not only intended to be awarded to the person that gets the most ballots, but it's a celebration of the people in the community that are doing good things for others and for the betterment of the community. Who was an inspirational person in your life, at any point, not necessarily when you were young, but at any point in your life, that, like, if you could give them a Citizen of the Year award, who would that be?
Yeah. Ooh, I don't know who it would be. I've always volunteered for everything. I mean, when I lived in Rock Island, I did a lot of volunteer work.
Yeah.
And it just carried on out here. I love doing it. I've met fabulous, fabulous people doing it. So I don't know that any one person's ever done it. And my friends back home were also volunteers, and we did, I've been a Red Cross volunteer for over 30 years.
Yeah, that was another thing that was on your nomination sheet.
Yeah, and so when you're around those kind of people, you just tend to do a lot of volunteering.
Yeah, it just is. It's the vibe of it, the cooperative, collaborative inspiration.
And they're nice people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you touched on it briefly with antiques, but more recently, folks may have seen you as you managed an antiques and pottery store downtown.
Right.
What's in the near future for you? One thing that was not on your voting information that went out to our chamber members, but is on the nomination form. I just wanted to read this because I think this is hilarious.
Okay.
There was a quote from your niece.
Oh.
That said, "You suck at retirement."
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yes. I have two nieces that I absolutely adore. They're my kids. And
Yeah.
they're my brother's kids. And I just have always been really, really active. And the worst part is they're turning out just like me. So it's not wonderful. But I had a whole bunch of things that kind of fell all at one time. And I emailed the kids and told them what I was doing, and Erin emailed back, and she goes, "You suck at being retired."
That's amazing. So what's in the near future for Rita?
Well, I'm going to do a lot of traveling, and I'm going to get my house clean, so help me God.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sitting down with me. Congratulations again on being nominated for Citizen of the Year.
It's really an honor to be nominated, but it's things I enjoy doing, and it's a way of helping people and meeting people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is just an aside, I was in the grocery store one time when one of my friends was here, and it just happened that people that I knew were in the grocery store the same day, and so I walked through, and everybody was saying hi to me, and I was saying hi to them, and finally we got to the end of the store, and she goes, "Do you know everybody in this town?"
True
I
story.
said, "No, it's just my friends that were shopping here."
True story. When I met my girlfriend and she first came up to spend some time with me here in Hot Springs, but I'd started getting involved in the community, and very similar thing. We had gone to the grocery store, we'd gone to, I think, Pomida at the time, and we just went to some places. Everywhere there was one or two people. It was just like, "Hey, how's it going? Hey." And she was like, "This is really creepy. How do you know everyone?"
When you live in a big city, nobody knows you.
Yeah.
I mean, you just don't run into people like that.
It's so amazing in these small towns, the sense of community.
Yeah.
So, awesome. Well, thank you again for sitting down.
Thank you.